Welcome, everybody, to a day in the life of an industrial logic developer, the first in four live events hosted by Industrial Logic taking place over the next 2 weeks. My name's Cody Vindak, and here's my fellow colleagues, Josh, Penny, Mark, Brett, Adam, and Jessica. For today's topic, we've been asked multiple times in the past what our day looks like delivering software. What techniques do we use? How do we ensure high quality? How do we manage risk? This session, you will learn directly how we code and collaborate to deliver better software. Today's panel is composed of folks who have currently or have in the past delivered software working as developers at Industrial Logic with various clients. Clients from startups to large corporations. Before we get started, just a little shout out that if you have any questions during the session, and would like them to be answered, we are going to pull them and talk about them. We really would want this conversation to be driven by you, the audience, as it'll make a better conversation anyway. So don't be shy and ask away. But let's kick this thing off. So shout out to the panel. What does a day in the life of an Industrial Logic developer look like?
Actually, I'll start by saying it kind of looks a little like this, except we're not in SteamYard, right?
Right.
So we have a Zoom location that we all go to in the morning, and then we use breakout rooms. And so in the morning, before our not a stand-up meeting, we get together, typically with the people we were working with yesterday, and we continue on where we're at. One of the things a lot of us do on our project, because we're using React Native, is we kill Metro. And if we don't come Metro, then we do it later on. But yeah, we get together, we continue where we were the day before. We'll mention this later. We look at our decision trees to see the tracking of progress, and then we have a regular meeting at 10 o'clock Central every morning. We join, we sync up, talk about anything, regroup, reprioritize, and then we go back into it. That's at a high level. We do that every day, and then some days we do other things. But jump in the morning, regular scheduled meeting, regroup, redirect, and then continue on. And then throughout the day, we might change where we're working, but generally speaking, I'm sticky most of the day. Some of us change more frequently, but from day to day, I might change who I'm working with. That's a very quick summary. Jessica and I were working together a couple days
ago. You know what? And that's the thing too, is we have the choice to decide what we would like to work on. Just because I was working on it this morning doesn't necessarily mean I can't take a look at the breakout rooms and decide, oh, I want to work on printing, and pop into printing and jump right into that. And mobbing helps me be able to do that too, without necessarily having that context right away.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I joined this group after 6 months, October, whatever, and I had spent a couple of hours installing software before being with the team, reading the README, and then an hour and a half into my first day on the group, I had committed to trunk tests and production code. So an hour and a half in, and that included fixing a few things that our README now has fixed, but because everyone updates the README as they work on it, it was 90%. Now it's 95%. So, I committed within an hour and a half of my first day. And there's no way I could have done that because, by the way, even though I sort of know JavaScript, I didn't know React Native at the time. So I came onto a team using some tools I had used and many tools I had not used, and committed in an hour and a half from my machine to trunk.
So Brett, for context, how big is the team you're working on, and does the whole team mob together?
So our team it slightly varies, whatever, about 12 to 15-ish. I mean, it depends on what you define by the team. Our mobs are typically, they vary in size, but 3 is a typical number. We sometimes pair. Just a couple of weeks ago, we swarmed on a thing that was blocking the rest of the group. So we had 7 people on one thing, because we were like, well, wait, this is important. We have to do it. But also, more importantly, it's not the whole thing, but parts of this block parts of that. And so if we can find a thread that allows us to sort of pull and then work on things in parallel, that we'll do that. But before we can do that, we group together. So a buddy of mine, David Nunn, calls it, and we do it, swarming. And or diverge and converge, right? We diverge when we need to, we converge when we need to. So diverge, we have 3-4 mobs working on different things that are relatively independent. Converge, we have maybe a couple mobs working on things. We don't often have whole team for a lot of things, but we have. We do whole teams for retros and such. But in terms of development, 3 is a typical number, 2 is common, 4 is common, 7, 10 is less common. But when we're doing that, we're consciously saying, look, this is something we all probably need, because that swarming, by working together, we're sharing what's going on. You don't have to hand off if you're there.
We're not playing telephone. We're just
right, exactly. And that telephone is a huge waste of time, just a huge waste of time. And the problem is it's untracked waste of time that people are just used to doing. And so we don't consider, for example, integration issues. And that's one of the reasons why the way we work is so odd to people, because a lot of the problems that you naturally have just don't happen when you're mobbing and when you're practicing continuous delivery and so on, or continuous deployment. Sorry, whichever term you want to use and whatever you're actually doing. Details.
Yeah, and with that too, I think it's just to maybe paraphrase, it sounds like you're mobbing close to 100% of the time.
Yep, close to.
Yeah.
But that's because I prefer to work that way. I mean, I have gone independent a couple times, and sometimes it was just we were doing some native code, and I didn't have enough knowledge to be participating, and so I went off to the side, went through tutorial, and then brought the team. We got back together, and we worked on. Actually, it was the second display thing, Cody, and I'm pretty certain I actually didn't do a single thing in that entire implementation that made it into the implementation, but I was the pack mule, right? I was carrying us along, but other people like you, for example, I mean, I can think of the things that you did, that Jessica did, and I was just sort of the pack mule. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful having that stress relief that, you know what, I'm not by myself. I've got a whole team of people working with me, contributing, as long as I can get over my need to be the person that came up with the idea. That is one thing. You have to be okay with sharing, like not needing credit.
Right. And maybe being a little uncomfortable because you feel like, oh, wait, am I adding value here? Well, you are adding value because you're likely asking questions that make, the other person think about something in a different way and then come up with maybe a better solution.
Yeah.
So one variation that we've been experimenting with in the group that I'm working in is we actually do have some planned solo time throughout the day. And part of that's based on energy level of the team. During a retrospective, we had found that we were really tired at the end of the week, more tired than we thought we should be. So we were mixing in some solo work in there, and we're using that as time to do research. So because it's a startup environment, there are a lot of things we want to take a look at, new technologies, different things we potentially want to add to the framework. So it gives people time to go off and look at that and spike stuff, but none of that code then gets applied to the baseline. It all is really knowledge gathering. It's reading up on this article or understanding this API better, so that when you're in the mob moves so much faster, because like I think kind of the term that Brett was bringing about, like you supply that knowledge and then the rest of the team runs with it with the code.
It's like a slingshot. You got to pull back to go fast.
That's a great analogy. I love it.
I'd like to demonstrate one value of mobbing. I also a caregiver for my wife. She needs something. I'll be right back. And guess what? The mob's going to continue. And this happens all the time. Yeah. I'm going to be gone for like 35 seconds. I'll be right back. And it's not going to stop the flow. Well, except for what I just did.
I think the other thing too that mobbing does is it helps reduce your cognitive load of how much you're having to keep within your head, because you're constantly rotating the driver, the navigator, the mob helper, researcher in the background. What all those different roles happen is you're only spending a short period of time in each of those, and you can focus on one thing at a time, whatever your role is at that point in time. And so it drastically reduces your cognitive load. And while you think you get worn out by working in a mob, it actually frees your brain up to really do the work.
Which is a skill in itself for people in the mob to be able to not feel like they have to be involved in like every single detailed decision, right? It's okay it gives you the opportunity when you're not the driver or navigator to step back and look at the forest instead of the trees.
Right.
I'd say it makes the team very resilient as well, because we see unexpected things happen all the time. Someone has an emergency at home or with a family member, or they're out sick or something, and the team just goes on. There's no, oh boy, look, so and so's not in. We don't have anyone working on that area of the code. It just doesn't happen. It's tolerant of life's unexpected things, and that's another huge benefit. I'd also ask a question: is how many? So we have 3 different clients that are represented by some of our people here today. One of them is a really big project. How many mobs on that very large project on a typical day are there?
I was thinking 4-ish, 5-ish.
Sometimes
4 or 5.
5, sometimes 4. More likely 4.
And
So-
that's a global team that's working on it, right?
Yeah, actually, come to think of it, in the mornings it's going to be more because our partners who are in England and India are working a different schedule. So in the mornings we might actually have a couple more mobs. So it might be 5, so 3 to 5 on the day, and that's just to accommodate different time zones.
I've seen times too where, again, sometimes we mob, sometimes we pair. Depends on what's being worked on. I definitely have seen times where we've stretched out and maybe have been working on 8 or 9 things at a time. It just kind of depends on the context and what the team wants to organize themselves around. Again, we're watching the baton, not the runner here.
Right.
So we had a great question in the comments here a while ago, calling out from Michael. Not familiar with how you use decision trees in your daily planning. Could we explain that at some point? And later on in the comments, it sounds like discovery trees was part of that. Could we maybe share how we use discovery trees in how we do our work? And what is a discovery tree?
I don't want to be the first one to talk every time.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, well, first of all, yes, you may have a story from that you're working on, but where do you start? How do you break that down? You can't just go after the whole thing. You need to break it down into little pieces. And so we do discovery trees, which are very simple little sticky notes, kind of branching off, where we come up, okay, this is a task we need to do. Well, how do we accomplish that task? We need to do A, B, and C. Well, then we might realize off of C, before we can do C, we must do this other thing. So yeah, here's a visual to break that down, but it's really, really nice. As we discover the work, we're putting it here. We can visualize it. We don't have to hold that in our cognitive load. Like, Penny was saying, we can't just be holding all this in our head. So let's put it here.
There's no set criteria. I mean, we're splitting our work up. And so if you have a good idea of how to split work up to allow it to progress logically, then it's easy to do these. A lot of times we'll start making them and then we go back and update the decision tree to cover information. And so they're not like do it and done. They're a tool for assisting in our development of something, but they're also used earlier in the process as a tool for discovering possible candidate individual stories. So we use them in different ways for different parts of the project.
A normal workflow for me is when I'm in the mob and I'm not the navigator or driver, sit back and start to think of the larger picture. Oftentimes I'll think about additional work that needs to be done or questions or, hey, what about this nuance? Instead of interrupting the work that is happening, I'll go to the discovery tree and add those cards to the discovery tree so that we can have that conversation when the time is appropriate. And that way the team continues to focus on one small thing and executing that one small thing. And then when you're done that one small item and hopefully you're committing that to production, you go back and look at the tree and say, okay, what do we want to work on next? So it starts to create a roadmap for you of what's the next small thing to work on.
So Artie in the chat just asked, so building a discovery tree is a mob activity and a living one?
Yeah,
Very
it
much so.
changes. I would agree with that. It changes every day, every second, every minute. if we find new work or we discover new work or we complete work, we try to update it and keep it kind of visually up to date as much as possible to kind of communicate that progress with the team and the other mobs.
It also helps us remember what we've done and what's coming up. I mean, right?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
don't know. When you get into your 50s, you start to forget things from the day before sometimes, or rather, you get good at letting things go. And so it's like, wait, what were we doing yesterday? The decision tree. Oh yeah, okay, got it.
I'm in my 30s and I'm already forgetting what I did yesterday.
I'm in my 50s, but I feel like I'm in my 30s and I still forget things. So, it's just.
Well, yeah, I mean, I totally 100% what Josh said. Right.
Now, question, and I think, Brett, you answered this, is it just a developer thing or do you interact with anyone else?
So we use the same kind of thing early in the process. So we have line items, and a line item is a big thing. It's going to be a lot of work. It's probably going to be a lot of work. It's not going to be a day. It's going to be weeks maybe of work. And so we start to break that down. We try to figure out what are the different characteristics of the thing. And when we do that, we've got the three amigos, right? We've got development, product, and QA in those meetings. So we have our customer and we have ourselves, and who's actually in there does vary a little bit depending on the area. But for the most part, yeah, it's the three amigos. And also when we're working through things, we'll often bring people in to look at the work before it's done, because we want to get feedback on it. And so the discovery trees also will involve QA there, and sometimes product. Less so, because the discovery trees for implementing the work we're doing now are at a finer level of detail than the discovery trees we're doing earlier in the process. Earlier in the process, it's like, what are the major moving parts? And now it's like, okay, how do we implement this moving part? And so different levels of granularity. But yeah, it's a fairly expressive thing that scales up or down. But I wouldn't try to start with a discovery tree on a line item and maintain a discovery tree all the way down to implementing it, because that's just, they're different things for different conversations. I wouldn't try to put them together myself.
Yeah, for this context, and maybe to explain the slide a little bit, and kind of talking about the context that Brett's talking about, we really do it at like a story level. So if we look at this slide here, API caller saves data. Now that's not the most user-focused story, but let's just say it's something like that. We then break the story down. We have a key of some sort where we show things that have been worked on or are done, things that are being worked on, and things that are still left to do. And we build on this thing as we go. Sometimes we delete things. Sometimes we add things at the last second. Sometimes we build a lot up front. It kind of depends.
Sometimes we break stuff off because we realize it's a whole different story.
Mm-hmm. And just maybe for some deeper conversations with this too, or deeper learnings with this, there's a great blog post that we actually ripped this slide from called "Working with Discovery Trees" by Steve Kuo. It is on the Industrial Logics blog site. I'll link it in the chat here in a bit. Definitely go check that out.
The thing that I really love about this is it's making the work visible. So as the work grows, it's obvious where and why it's growing. So like oftentimes I've seen when people use some of the larger tools to track stories and there's not the relationship between them, you can't see all of a sudden, a project manager comes in or whatever and is like, where did all these stories come from? Why did they get created? Well, this makes it more obvious, and you can see which portions of the implementation were more difficult and larger because that part of the tree just gets big, and which things were easier. And it really is I think there was a question about, do you use it with other parts of the organization? For us in the startup, we all have to be on the same page, and the people, the project manager wants to know how the team's doing. So we use this as a representation, and he can come and look at it at any point during the day to see what the team's working on. He doesn't have to come and ask status. He just looks at the board and sees, and you can get maybe a quick high level view of like, oh, I can quickly see 50% of the cards are blue. So maybe 50% is done because I know that more will be created. Maybe some will be deleted, but it kind of gives you a quick visual sense of how far that piece of work is along. And so it's a great information radiator to other parts of the organization.
Awesome. So with that, what else does a normal day look like? So you've talked about kind of the start of the day. You get together, talk about what you're going to work on. You've kind of talked about that. We usually work in mobs, and then from that we kind of break the work down into discovery trees. What does the actual like working process look like then? Say you're working on your discovery tree, and you're actually sitting down and writing code. Can someone share maybe what that looks like from our perspective?
I'll start real quick. So first thing is we probably are in Zoom already. We have a bunch of breakout rooms that have names. Sometimes the names are actually relevant to the work, and sometimes they're fun, but whatever. And then like Jessica and I decide we're going to go work on blah. We go work on blah. So the first thing we do is we typically, because if we've just switched to another one, honestly, we're probably just finished up something. And so we'll probably say, let's take a quick break, because one of the things we're bad about is not taking breaks. And I cannot emphasize this. Mobbing is wonderful. It's exhausting. You need to take breaks. And if you don't take breaks, your brain gets messed up and then you stop mobbing well. I mean, that's just, you need to take breaks. And like once an hour is good, but we take a quick break. We come back, pull from Git, because I don't want to have to like start making changes on old code. And then someone starts working on something. We go to the decision tree. What's next? Sometimes we'll do some probing. It's like we're not exactly what we're working on is complicated, and the actual underlying data is complicated. There's long connections, and so sometimes we'll do a quick probe. If I do this, does this basically do what I think it's going to do? Great. Okay, that we got an idea. Git checkout, reset. Now let's go write a test. So we go test first. We do some discovery on how the code works, and then we write tests to capture our understanding, and we go back and implement. Sometimes we go straight up test first because it's fairly straightforward, but we try to switch often. Like often, 5 minutes is good. 10 minutes is okay. Much more than 10 minutes, we do it, but we always feel it. So we try to get to green. Sometimes we'll use handoff branches to hand off rather than waiting for somebody, waiting to get back to green. A lot of times we'll just do parallel development, but we try to take small steps and try to figure out ways to get back to trunk as often as possible, because I don't know about the rest of you, but I believe in the hidden cost of integration is at least an order of magnitude worse, more than that, but at least an order of magnitude worse than waiting for integration. The longer you wait for integration, it gets exponentially worse in terms of quality going down, defects going up, et cetera, et cetera. So we believe in fast feedback.
How often would you say a typical mob integrates once or a day? Yeah, how often do they integrate a day?
So many.
30,
A lot.
I don't know, 20, 30. I mean, I can look at the Git statistics, but every commit is an integration point to trunk. Every commit is an integration point to trunk. There you go. Thank you. I knew it was big, and I saw this chart, but I didn't remember the numbers.
So it looks
So
like
700 commits a month, 20 days out of the month, 2 into 7, 35 commits a day, roughly. So we integrate about 35 times a day. There you go.
How big is like a typical commit?
We try to keep it small, especially in the case that something does go wrong, then you know exactly what's wrong.
1 file, 2 files. If you get much above 5 files, which does happen, because the thing is, the reason committing frequently is so important is we're also refactoring the code. If I refactor the code and you don't get it, then you're going to have integration problems. So that's one of the reasons why we have to commit so frequently, so that we can commit so frequently so that we can commit so frequently. And if you don't commit frequently, you won't be able to. I mean, I understand that's a paradox, but if it's not a paradox, it's probably not representing reality. So, 10 lines of code would be a good commit size. 3 lines of change. I renamed a method and I push, because you know what? We didn't like the name of the method and I push. But the question you didn't ask, Cody, is we typically switch who's on the keyboard after a commit. A simple rename like that, we wouldn't probably do it, but we done it, right? We spend 20 minutes looking at something. We have a couple of renames. Okay, well, that's something it's better. It's not perfect, but it's better. And that's my internal mantra is what we're doing better in the long run. A little bit better, not a lot better, a little bit better. So small commits are great.
So question from the chat regarding size of commits from Joseph. I would expect they use conventional commit messages, or at minimum, keep them small and clearly defined.
We have a couple of people that have a couple of different. We've used conventional. We talk about conventional commits. We've also got Arlo's conventional commits. No, we don't. Mm-mm. No, because we're working on the code every day. We do use the commit messages, but I don't know about y'all. I look at the commit code, not the commit messages. The commit messages are often comments, even when they're well formed like that.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not doing that.
Okay, I do still follow this commit will.
Yes.
And then, what will it do? It's a high level, quick summary of what you did.
Yeah. So we try to word on our group. We try to word the messages. This commit will, then that's your commit message. Back to the test that we realized we missed.
We try to put
example of that, like this commit will.
Yeah. I don't actually put this commit will on my commit message, but that's how I started in my head. And
but yeah, I'm a fan of the storm. I mean, I love the standard, right? The commit message standard. Haven't never used it on a project, but boy, if you're going to do, here's the thing, it's a great idea. And if you're going to start writing tools to look at and analyze your commits, it's a wonderful thing to do. But we're not doing any of that. We're trying to deliver value to our customer. And so as a result, it's a great idea, but we're not doing that. Now, on a large project with lots of history, it would be handy to have those kind of things. But
Yeah.
I don't tend to look at commit messages over time myself.
Mm-hmm.
I should say this slide, by the way, is based upon real data. We actually have run some scripts to see, well, how often are we committing on this one of these projects? And that number 48 was the average. And we were assessing a large company, and looking at many teams and how often they committed. And these numbers came out. And so they're obviously very, very small numbers of commits per day in terms of how we think of it. So they're not, we even call it micro commits because it's very micro, little things, even a variable name change,
Another great question from the comments from Carlos. How do other people in the team keep their WIP in sync with all the new commits coming from other people? Are they all continuously rebasing their changes?
Yes.
Yeah, the way we do it is we do a poll as much as we can. We want to make sure we're working on the most up-to-date code and with micro commits that changes very frequently. As well as keeping WIP in sync, right? We have our work area with our discovery trees. We have a WIP limit there specifically, so we all kind of know what we're working on at a much larger scale. Oh, hey, look, it showed team board right here. So if you notice that kind of in the middle section, WIP limit of 7, then you see the actively being worked on as kind of our discovery tree section. But yeah, so we do micro commits and we try to pull every time we can, probably again 5 to 10 minutes, like Brett mentioned earlier, of what we're trying to do our own micro commits. So we're at least pulling every 5 to 10 minutes, unless we're going a little bit longer.
2 comments. I want to emphasize something because this is one of the things I'm a stickler about. That WIP limit is over 2 columns, not 1. All right. So if we have 20 things, we wouldn't get 20 things ready for QA. So between being worked on in QA, if we get to 7, nothing new starts generally. And actually, we've been good about that. And we do whatever we can to work with QA to work down we work from the end backwards. So anything that's ready for QA, get that delivered. And now you have space to bring more work from being worked on into ready for QA. But if you don't limit the ready for QA, you're doing yourself no favors. In fact, what you're doing is you think you're limiting WIP, but you're actually building up a big batch that's going to be tested later on. So it's really important if you're going to maintain WIP over a logical collection of columns. Another thing is, this is implicit. Our tests are slow right now. They take about a minute and a half clock time, a little over a minute to run clock time for 4,500 tests. And that's woefully slow, for context. All right, so we've got 4,500 automated checks of the system, and they take about a minute clock time to run, which is okay. But I'd love them to be about half that time. I actually love them to be about 10 seconds or less, but they're not prohibitively slow right now.
And for context here, this slide here is an actual team board we have pulled from one of the projects that Industrial Logic's currently working on. So this kind of shows just some of the columns that the team has created that made sense for the way the work flowed from being ready to get worked on, being worked on, and then being completed.
I would like to pivot back to Carlos's question because he did say,
Yeah.
are we continually rebasing their changes? And I wanted to make sure too, is like at least on the project we're currently on, we are, I would say 99% trunk based. I think Brett mentioned earlier that sometimes we do have small handoff branches, but so yeah, the rebasing is literally rebasing local commits from trunk or from main. It's not rebasing other long-lived branches. I thought that was worth pointing out because there's several rebasing.
One other comment, because this may or may not be obvious to people. There's rebase and then there's rebase. We're rebasing unsaved, unshared commits. We might rebase in the branch. I don't care about that. Once a branch gets merged in, I don't care what happened to the branch. But on trunk, I don't rebase commit. I'm never doing a force push. All right. So I'm doing a rebase so that my commits go after other commits, but those are my commits that have not actually been shared with somebody else. So just that's one thing. So we're live. If I need to deal with a merge conflict and get the test passed, well, I'll do that.
Yep.
So.
And for this data, this is 48 average commits per day being merged into
trunk
main.
Yeah.
We barely use branches. We honestly only for spike code typically, where hey, we have an experiment. Oh hey, this is cool, but this is spaghetti code. Let's not push this into production. Let's actually, test drive this solution. A couple other questions here. Is there a need to create change logs from commits? This is a question from Artie.
We actually, okay, so interesting. So that's a contextual question. We are working on replacing an old application that only works on iOS to work on both iOS and Android. And so as a result, we have we have kind of a fixed list of features that we're working on. And so we are working with our customer. Our customer knows what they're selling and what they need for features. And so we actually we're actually a fixed bid contract. And so the change log would be the features we need are there or not there. So we don't need it, but I'm not suggesting you shouldn't have change logs. And if change logs are important, then I'd go back to the earlier comment about using structured messages. I would definitely work on, actually, I would go so far as to have some kind of structured message and some kind of pre-commit hook that makes sure that it's in there so that I can actually then use tooling to produce change logs. And I know that sounds like a lot of work, but if change logs are part of the delivery of the value stream, then I'm going to make sure that the change logs are as up to date as possible with tooling. Because the older I get, the more I forget, and the better I can write scripts to make my brain work when it doesn't work. So I'm all about letting the computer do computer stuff and me doing the thinking stuff.
An alternative that we've been experimenting with to change logs is videos. When we're done
all the time.
Capability, and we do it sometimes almost like micro videos. Whenever there's some small new functionality, because an earlier point, when we say we push the trunk, that also means that it's going to production in the case of the project I'm working on. So all those commits are new versions to production. And as soon as they get to production, we're making a video showing that feature and then sharing that with the rest of the team. You can even go as far as then posting that on the site itself if users are interested in that. So, it's like continually demoing the software for all the new features that are coming.
Yep, continuous demoing, and it's like the old-fashioned days of like at the end of the 2-week sprint, you show a demo of what you did. This is much more micro. It's throughout the day. Our customers are seeing little videos being produced and shared in Slack messages, and they're like, "Wow, did you see that? They just finished that feature." And these are not highly polished videos. Like we're just quickly producing a video and shoving it into Slack, but it is a practice we call continuous demoing. And clients love it. It's a wonderful way to show progress. And yeah,
there definitely is a psychological safety there for those videos and getting over the hump of being able to see yourself in the video. But when you first think about it, people are like, oh, I don't want to create the video. It's not me. At some point you're like, you know what? I flubbed my words. I messed up. just send the video anyway. You know, it is what it is. Let's get the information out there. This doesn't have to be super polished, because our work at hand is, let's start working on the next feature.
And sometimes there's no words in the videos. It's just silent, it's just showing the interaction, showing some interaction that's there.
And Mark points out something again. It's detachment, right? Don't worry about it. Just do something quick, because if you deliver something that has interesting information in it, the format isn't as important. My sister visited me in Ireland and took a bunch of pictures and made a storybook for it. And all of her friends in her storybook group were like, "Oh my God, your storybook is so amazing." Well, yeah, because you've got pictures of things that are 2,000 years old. If you have good content, the form isn't as important. And so it's really, the value of this is, hey, look, we just did this. We couldn't do it yesterday. Your customer is seeing things that they could not do the day before. You keep doing that, and guess what? You're building up the expectation that I can slowly through time give you what you want. You're building trust. So it's actually, it's don't not do it because you're worried about how it looks. And by the way, I hate my voice when I listen to it on videos. So I don't actually, most of our videos don't have, there's no audio and there's no person. We're literally just showing the demo and maybe moving the mouse, say, look at this. So it's very low fidelity, but the customers love it, right?
Yeah, there's something, there's a saying, show rather than tell.
Yeah.
There's something about software actually working, actually demonstrating the value, instead of just saying, oh yeah, it does the thing now. It's so much more powerful. And yeah, whatever it takes to get from you to video, if there's a bunch of hurdles in the way, just get rid of them.
Actually,
Again,
you remind me of a story. Remember, like 4 months back, one of our customers, I won't use his name, was like, yeah, I actually was able to give the device to the CEO and he could walk around. I didn't need to handle the device. It's like, well, what can I do? Just use it. It works. This is a working, this is feature incomplete, but the features that are there work. You can make a sale. You can, there's a whole bunch of stuff that works. It's just, there's some things you can't do. And so rather than having to carefully allow demos with the executives, like, no, just touch it yourself and walk away and come back. They were blown. In my recollection, Josh, were they not blown away by that? They completely unprecedented for them.
Yep.
Yeah. And we get that for free just because of the way you work. That's the thing. The thing that a lot of people I don't think understand is certain ways of working are so different that you cannot appreciate them until you've had the experience. Git is, for me, an example of that. TDD is another example of that. Continuous delivery. All these practices, they're much more powerful than even obvious on the surface because of how they change human interaction and how they change feedback loops, which most people don't think about until you're getting bit in the butt by them. So,
yeah, Brett, you haven't said the word evolutionary design, but like we don't break off into a bunch of teams that start building components and then very, very late in the game try to integrate a bunch of components. We're building working software. So no matter what, let's say I'm building a system to book tennis courts, the very first story is going to just be very basic, book a court, and not factor in teams or any other leagues or this or that, anything complicated, just book a court. And it's going to work, and it's going to be underdeveloped, but it'll be very primitive, but it will work. You can book a court, and we're going to go from there. So we're building up from an embryonic version of the software all the way through more and more versions. The walking skeleton's another term for it. Exactly. You have a walking skeleton. You're adding flesh to the bones. That's how we do things. So you have working, tested software, albeit as Brett said, not completely done. And as the weeks and months pass, it becomes more fuller and fuller bodied, and until it's a finished thing.
Yeah.
Which is part of the conversation on a regular basis of, is this necessary now? We're constantly trying to decrease the amount of work we're doing. And so the work we do is high quality, but then maximize the amount of work not done. Yeah. And we'll constantly say, is that needed now? Is this small added feature good enough to put in the user's hands to get feedback from them before we add all these 20 other features that they may or may not need?
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to there being a vertical slice of what we're actually trying to build. We're not horizontally building, like say, for example, the tennis court was a web page and there's actually like 30 buttons that we maybe were thinking of building, we wouldn't go build all 30 buttons and then you click them and the page crashes. We're just going to build the one button, the one form for booking the tennis court first, and that enables, again, you could release that the second that actually works. And that's going back to the story about the execs walking away with it. Yeah, go walk away with it, with the demo. Everything that you can press works. There's things not there, but yeah, they're intentionally not there because they don't do anything.
And by the way, that idea often leads to not doing work. Now, interestingly, in our case, we have an existing application with 10 years of use with real customers that have features that they're using. And unfortunately, they've got at least one customer using every feature. So we can't get rid of a lot of features with what we're doing. But a lot of times, you show a partial thing and it's like, oh, actually, that's the value we need. We really thought we needed this more, but let's just wait. And then it doesn't ever come up again because you didn't need it, right? I mean, what's the stats? Like 80% of all features aren't used. Most, like 50% of all corporate applications just fail flat out. 70 or 80% of features are either partially or not used. So if you can find the stuff you don't want to do, it turns out not testing code that you didn't write is the most efficient way of saving time. Right? The stuff you don't write saves you a lot of time.
Yeah, and we love a pull, not a push.
Yes, yeah, 100%. Push is bad. Pull good.
So question from the chat from Dev. What kind of tools do you use to work remotely in the mob? Example, to synchronize code if needed, and how do those tools affect you when switching roles? One shout out before we answer this too is our third session actually is remote ensemble development, actually hosted by Josh. So we'll jump into this for a little bit, but we're going to have a really big deep dive into that next week, Wednesday.
Git.
Yeah. Zoom.
Some people use mob.sh, which I love mob.sh if you're doing handoffs. It's really quick and easy. It really just automates a lot of the stuff you would be doing yourself. So that's a tool you might look at, but honestly, Git and branching is good enough. Which I was a year ago, I was on a different project where we were going from something to Git, and it was an old client server revision control system, and I've been working with Git for so long, I forgot what it was like to work in those tools. And so, honestly, I got to say that Git is an enabling technology. Right? It allows us to work in ways that, say, CVS or RCS or ClearCase. I think you can work that way, but you have to do so much more work to not do work. So, yeah, Git's the biggest one, and Zoom.
Or there's some other collaboration tools out there. So the project I'm working on, we're using Gather, but there's Teamico and some other ones that create this virtual office space. And instead of having breakout rooms in Zoom, you create tables or areas in Gather, and then you can name them, and people literally vote with their feet. If you're interested in working on, this story today, you move your avatar over to that table, and that's where you're at. And those tools are great because they pretty much automatically set up breakout rooms for anyone who's in that local area. And you can do audio, video right in those, and screen sharing as well. So it's like a combination of the collaboration, the communication mechanism, Zoom or Gather, code sharing, which is Git, and then also just information sharing, the discovery trees. Do that on Mural or Miro or any of those other collaboration tools.
Yeah. So to add on to that, we do have some kind of video sharing software. We use Git, and since we're trunk based, it really is just Git push, and then whoever's taking over, if I'm taking over driver, I'll share my screen and I'll do Git pull, and I'm ready to drive. And that's how we do code synchronization.
Yeah, we barely ever use branches, so I think we really need to clarify that. That question from Mark Fay. And
just FYI, if we are using branches, a couple things. They don't last weeks. They last a day or two typically. We might have branches that are 2 or 3 weeks old for review purposes, but we eventually delete them. So branches are short-lived and integrated pretty quickly. But it's really common. It's like, oh, wait, we don't know how we're going to do this. We start working on something, and it's going to take a long time for us to hand off who's on the keyboard. So get what? Hey, push it on a branch. I'll take it over, and I'll pick up with failing tests on a branch. So if you don't trade off often, you're going to find that you're going to get exhausted or detached. So you want to rotate often. And so if we bit off more than we can chew, the most likely thing we're going to do is we're going to go get checkout dot or get reset head hard. We're going to go back and just say, let's try it again because we did learn something. But if we think we've got something worth going forward, or if we're still trying to learn enough to even learn how to think about it, put it in a branch, experiment. And then oftentimes those branches are there for reference. In fact, we just did this 2 days ago. Adam had a branch and we were reviewing it. And then when we got what we figured out how to do, re-implemented, branch is gone. So the branch is a backup tool for when we don't know how to slice it thin enough to do trunk based.
Right. And I would say too, just to be clear, if someone asked me about the day in the life of, my day in the life of being a developer, branching is not something that would come to my mind because typically nothing. I don't do any branching on the typical day or week.
Question with that actually, because folks here aren't branching much. What is merge? What merge conflicts do you run into? What merge strategies do you have?
I mean, we have the rebasing, but I hardly ever deal with a merge conflict. I don't even remember the last time I had to deal with a merge conflict.
And that's a 15-person team actively programming all day long.
Yeah, and the reason for that is you go back and we coordinate every morning and we talk about what conversation is we talk about whether we're going to be stepping on each other's toes. So we're going to step on each other's toes, but not very often. And when we do, rather than sending something in Slack, someone will just go jump over to the room and say, hey, can we have a quick chat? So the first thing we do is we don't get them very often. When we do get them, if they're easy to resolve, we resolve them. But if there's even any question at all, we'll bring the person in.
Yeah.
Right. And also because they just pushed it, it's fresh on their mind. They're probably, it's still in their head. So that's the thing. You're going to get the information and be able to address it really quickly. Yeah. Micro commits for the win. 100%.
And basically the 99% of the time, there's no branches. So a very tiny percentage of the time we'll use branches. And then we actually like the use of those branches, that 1%, right? They serve a purpose.
When I saw the number of commits, we probably have I would say, I'm going to guess less than 0.1% of all of our commits have merge conflicts because we haven't had 50 merge conflicts in the last several months, right?
I don't remember the last time we've had a merge conflict. And
I've had some
times a day.
Yeah, I've had some when we're renaming constants and such, that kind of thing. But otherwise, it doesn't. It does happen, but it's rare.
Yep.
Actually, the merge conflicts happen if we ever work with a branch and we haven't done something. We haven't properly been rebasing main into the branch.
And from the chat here, yeah, like if there is a merge conflict, it's very trivial because we're trying to commit our work very quickly. We're continuously integrating, hopefully every 5 to 10 minutes. So sometimes it's even better to be like, all right, get reset hard. You know what? I'll just make the change again because it was so small. Maybe I just did a rename or an extract method, and it's just easier just doing the change again. So a question for the panel again. What happens if you get blocked? What are some strategies that folks here use when we get blocked?
Call for help. I might pop into another room. I often have popped into another room and asked Cody if he could come and join me. I've had questions that I needed from product, and a lot of times I can actually speak to somebody, a product person, right away and get the clarity, and then I'm not blocked after all, and keep it moving. So.
Yeah, I think the environment is set up to minimize blocks. Like people are available to answer those questions. And if they aren't available, then mark, in the rare cases, mark it on the discovery tree as blocked and move on to something else. But the goal is to not have them blocked, to make to try to get the user expertise in the mob as much as possible.
And maybe to know who to reach out to, which is why we do like chartering at the beginning, and we know who's in the community and who has what role.
Can you talk a little bit more about the chartering activity?
Do we have an example we can show?
I don't think we prepared one, but I mean, when I joined the team, I was able to go to the place where y'all had chartered because the team had chartered before I joined, and I was able to look at the working agreements, and that's something that can trigger me. And so I was able to look at the agreements, and generally speaking, yep, I can work with this team, which wouldn't surprise me because it was a bunch of fellow ILers, and so of course I'm going to be able to work with them. We all are crazy in similar ways.
I think the cool thing about chartering, though, is it really gives an entire level set. So like Jessica talked about community, Brett was talking about working agreements, but you also talk about what is the goal of this project, not just what are our deliverables, but what is the goal of actually the company in providing what we're about to build. Like, why are we doing this in the first place? And I think that's really important because that helps developers, as we're working on the project, make decisions, right? That influences our prioritization. It influences how we talk with the rest of the community and understanding what that goal is. And we're all working towards that same goal. And then we can also outline like all of the tools that we have available for us to use. And those kind of things. So chartering encompasses a lot, and it's really important for the team to kind of get off the ground.
It also includes some risks, looking at risks. So we want to often go after the risky stuff really early. And so we identify what are our biggest risks and make sure we're tracking that. So pretty important.
And I want to throw one comment in about chartering. Like at the turn of the century, I was on a team. We did some chartering. We didn't look at it for 6 months. I went back and I read the charter, and it was like, bam, bam, bam. We did everything we said we were going to do. In fact, at the beginning, we were doing training and delivery. And so we said, look, we're going to do primarily training. We're going to emphasize cross-pollination, but at some point we know we're going to switch to delivery mode. And we actually put that in the charter. And I'd forgotten it. And we did that exact thing. It was like, oh my God, we did exactly what we said we were going to do. Exactly what Penny said. We level set, and then it was planted in our mind. And as a result, this is 2002. So every 2 weeks, if you were working on the front end, you would work in the middle tier. If you're working in the middle tier, you go to the back end. So new developers from COBOL, they were learning, I hate to admit this, J2EE and Java development, but that's what it was. And we literally had people who had never used a mouse, and we were training them on XP and such. And so but we chartered and we followed the charter. It was really, the chartering is really a profound thing. You don't even know how much it's useful until you've experienced the results of one, I think.
Cool. So one of the last questions I'll ask, how do we handle predictability? How do we measure how long things are going to take? What are some ways we do that?
So we try not to guess. I'm not very good at guessing. Our team is using something called Monte Carlo forecasting. Oh, okay. Here's the slide too to kind of get a visual of that.
So we don't predict. I mean, we do, but we don't. We measure. We measure and project, right? But, we talked about detachment from the beginning. Detach yourself from thinking you know how long anything's going to take. And rather than do that, give something that is a part of what someone's looking for, and then work on that. And if you continually build up from that, you're going to build a relationship, and you're going to be able to develop what needs to be developed versus what you agreed to develop that you predicted was going to be done. Don't conform to a plan when you can have a conversation and get rid of a bunch of work.
And I'll just say these probabilistic forecasts are very important to management. So they want to look at this data and say, okay, what's the probability of us getting something done by a certain date? They do need to know that.
Yep.
You've looked at discovery trees. There's also in one of these big projects, there's Jira. And Jira has this actionable agile plugin that generates this data. So, that's not really the day in the life of the developer. They're not really even looking at Jira most of the time, but there are some folks that are updating Jira and coming up with numbers like this, which says, yeah, there's a 95% chance that by September 18th, we will have this done. And we find that these probabilistic numbers are pretty darn accurate. The stories we work on are relatively small. We're not doing any story point estimates. There's no sprints. It's just a continuous flow, but it's measuring our work completed, and that is at the story level. And then that stuff's used in the calculations for Monte Carlo, and it's pretty darn accurate. It's been working really well for us.
Mhm.
So if you haven't looked at this kind of probabilistic forecasting, there's another session we're doing, and that's coming on Friday of next week that you can attend to learn more about probabilistic forecasting.
Something to point out here, though, notice this is a very different conversation. We're not saying, the customer's not saying we need it by September 3rd. Well, we can't do it. We're having a conversation that is, we have this event happening. We would like this by this point. Well, based on how we're going now, this is the likelihood. Do you want to increase that likelihood? Let's have a conversation about what we can pull out so that we can get stuff done. So we're talking about what has been and what is, not what we wish the future to be. And that helps with the conversation. But there's a presupposition that you're showing something on a regular basis coming up to this point, right? They have to have something to trust.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And yeah, we will go deeper into this conversation next week, Friday, for the Better Product Management with Probabilistic Forecasting. Actually, here, wrapping up the event, here is a plug for the next 3 live sessions that we are doing the next 2 weeks. So on Friday, we're doing Industrial Logic's engineering practices. We're going to talk more about some of the engineering practices we talked about today, like micro commits, decision trees, discovery trees. And then on the 13th, we'll be talking about remote ensemble development. And then, next week, Friday, we'll be talking more about Monte Carlo and other ways of forecasting. So would love to see you all there. Again, bring some great questions to those events. So from that, for those who have stuck around, here is a QR code. If you would like to book a free Q&A session, if you have any questions about Industrial Logic's engineering services and how we can help make you build better software sooner, feel free to schedule a free 1-hour session with us. You can scan this code. It goes right to our website. There's a form you can fill out. You can fill in what is your organization's needs, and we will get right back to you. And finally, here is a 20% discount on our next Technical Excellence Workshop. The Technical Excellence Workshop, it's a great course to level up as a developer. We go over a lot of the same values, practices, and techniques we talked about today, such as ensemble programming, test-driven development, refactoring. This discount code is good until September 18th. So we would love to see you all there. And we will also publish these slides too. So if you somehow miss this code, it'll be on there. And we're also going to upload this talk probably next week. But anyways, keep the comment section going. We will jump in and respond to some of the questions still in there that we didn't get a chance to talk about. But thank you all for joining. This has been a great session. And we will catch you in the next one. All right. Happy Wednesday. See everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the question.